Hi everyone, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here with a new PB&J card class, and this is the first in a series of 7 videos where I will be sharing with you a variety of styles, techniques, and products along with my personal approach to designing and mass producing cards to inspire you to have your own handmade holiday and to enjoy your Penny Black products. And this sort of design process, it's similar to others that I've shared in the past, and it works whether you have a lot of time to make cards or maybe you're working on your cards for next year or if you're in a rush because the process is inherently a time saver. Even if that's not important to you. So to start out, I like to limit my supplies plus keep my motivation high. So when I'm ready to make some cards, I choose just one featured element that I want to focus on. And here's a list of many I go to for holiday cards. And so today we're just going to focus on creating a scene, which was my focus in designing these cards. So I always like to try and gather and limit my supplies. It makes it easier for me to start. So I have just an old photo box and I shop new products, old products, anything that fits that featured element that I've chosen, and I put it into my box. So what I'm showing you here are some of Penny Black's newest transparent stamp sets that are perfect for scenic stamping. Also have a couple of cling stamps that I grabbed and put in my box. So I want to choose the ones that I love, the ones that only suit this featured element that I'm focusing on, which is making scenic cards. And with that, I also have grabbed my Bristol smooth paper. So that's not a Penny Black product, but I've had a lot of you ask me to show the cover of the paper that I use. I also have my Eclipse masking paper. So again, in just one step, I gather up those supplies, I put them in my box so that the next time I can sit down and make cards, I have everything right there and I'm not overwhelmed with too many things. So then as I make cards for this sort of featured element, I'm probably going to make 3 to 6 cards, and then I'll move on to a new featured element so I'm not getting bored and my motivation stays high. So these I am going to work one scene at a time, and I'll show you how I do one scene. First, I've stamped my image onto my Bristol smooth paper. Then you saw there that I also stamped it onto that Eclipse masking paper, and I will cut that out off camera. Now I want to add this adorable little cabin, and I'm also going to do some masking with that. Now when I was showing you the stamps right out of my box at the beginning, you probably noticed I save these masks that I create and I just stick them right to the front of my stamp packaging. So first I stamp that onto the masking paper, and now I'm going to stamp it right onto the card. So the trees were stamped with a Versafine smoky gray color, and now this I want to have a really watercolor look. So I'm actually coloring directly onto this stamp using Tombow dual brush pens, and I'm going to stamp that down onto my card using just kind of working section by section. And why I've chosen these pens or these markers is because they are water soluble, and by stamping them onto that Bristol smooth paper, I can go back with a paintbrush and just water and lightly blend those out, and it will look like I've painted the whole image. So it's a really fun way to get a watercolor look. And I find the key to this is that Bristol paper that I showed at the very beginning. And then of course these really awesome scenic stamps. Now the stamps that I'm using, everything that I'm using is listed for you down in the YouTube description box below. And all the Penny Black products are also listed and linked. So if you're wondering about a color of marker, a color of ink, or a specific stamp, everything will be down for you down in that YouTube description box below. You can see here I've added multiple colors onto that cabin, so I just worked section by section or sort of color by color. And I'm stamping in the MISTI stamp positioning tool, which allows me to keep re-stamping that, and it holds its place there on the card. Now for this design process, I tried to do as much sort of batch stamping or working in batches or assembly line style as much as possible. But for scenic cards, I find it's kind of just a card by card process, but I do cut all of my cardstock. These are all 4¼ by 5½ inch standard size cards. So I have a stack of that sitting there in my box that's all pre-cut and just ready for me to sit down and make these scenes. And what's fun about these is there are like a million different ways that you can create these scenes. Now I am going to go ahead here and zoom in. I just have my paintbrush and a little bit of water. I also have a paper towel to the side where I can, actually I'm going to do that in just a minute. But I will show you that in a second. I decided to do my background here. So I've put that mask over the cabin. I've also cut out the trees and I'm putting those on top. I do not cut all of the little fiddly branches. That's way too much work for me. So mostly focusing on just the trunks of the trees. And I also just am trimming another piece, a little sort of scratch piece of that Eclipse masking paper to mask off the ground. So I'm going to just put that down. And then I am going to use some inks with an ink blending tool and a foam pad. Any type of ink will work for this. I just chose my inks based on the colors that I wanted for this background. And again, the exact colors I'm using will be listed for you down in that YouTube description box below. So you can see here I'm just lightly sponging that, starting at the bottom along that mask. I can go right over those tree trunks, right over the cabin because they've been covered up with that masking paper. This is a really quick way to create a sky. Here I'll come in with a lighter color. And I wanted this to have sort of a dusk or nighttime even look because I want to color in some light shining from the windows of the cabin. Now, while everything still has the masks, I'm going to add even more trees. So I've grabbed a tree stamp. Again, these Scenic Stamps, the collection that I put in my box is so great for these cards. I'm inking that with Distress ink because that's a water-soluble ink. So as you can see there with that paintbrush and my paper towel, I can go ahead and blend any of that out if I want to. I've also, after I've inked it lightly, spritzed it with water. But it is so fun to design these scenes. And I think these cards, they're great for the holidays and for Christmas, but they're also really nice if you're doing masculine cards, winter birthdays, just thinking of you cards in the winter. So you can get a lot of use out of them. And if any of your masks move on those branches, I don't, at least for me, I don't stress about that just because I'm going to go back with some white paint at the end. So if there's anything that got stamped on top that I want it to be white, I can just add a little bit of white paint there. So you can see I misted that stamp, stamped it down, and then any sort of blobby areas or areas I wanted to look more watercolored or blended, I went ahead and did that with my paintbrush, and the paper towel is sitting right there so I can dip my paintbrush in the water, lightly dab it on the paper towel so that when I bring it to the paper, it's not too wet. And that Bristol smooth paper we're working on makes it really easy to blend. So it's so fun now to take the masks off. And again, I save those. I just put them right there, right on the front of my stamp packaging. And you can use them more than one time. And there is our cabin. And now here is the part I was going to show you before. So I've got my cup there with just water, my paper towel, and I'm going to pat that off so it's not too wet, and just ever so lightly blend right up close to those lines. And look at that, it just looks watercolored. It's that easy to get this watercolored look. If you've never done this before, you might want to stamp that cabin onto like a piece of scratch Bristol smooth paper and test out how much water that you like, how that works, how the effect works before you're doing on one where you've already inked the background and stamped those trees in the background. But I think the idea is just to not expect it to look perfect, and that's part of the charm. Now here's where, if I had tested this out before, I would have found out that red goes really pink when you get it wet. So I will show you how to fix that. I was not going to start over at this point, but I didn't want a pink door. So I'll show you how to fix that later in the video. Now here I'm taking those markers, and where I want it to be an even darker shadow, I just colored a little bit onto directly to the paper. And then I will take that paintbrush that's just barely damp and then just lightly blend that out. And then I can continue to do that on the cabin. And it just keeps coming to life. You can do as little or as much of these details and darkening up and shadows as you want. So you can see there, just doing a mix of colors and pulling them in. I felt like the brown I used on the side of the house was a little bit more gray than the one I used on the front of the house. So I just pulled a little bit of that front of the house marker over to the side just to unify everything a little bit more. And just adding a touch here or there. I like to fiddle around with coloring especially, so I kept that in there for you to see, but you certainly don't have to do that quite as much as I am. Just going with the marker directly there. And then going back and blending that with a damp brush, not too wet. Get the chimney as well. So just kind of blending what was existing from the stamping and then adding a little bit more marker directly to the paper and then blending with the paintbrush. Now you could certainly also just stamp this in a waterproof ink and color it in or paint it in. Now here I am pressing some ink pads onto an acrylic block because I just want a very light watered down blue to add some shadow up here on the roof. And I do want to be careful not to touch with that wet paintbrush any of those brown areas because they will bleed or blend up into wherever it is wet, because that is that water soluble marker that was stamped with. So here I'm going to add a little bit of shadow to the ground. This makes a huge difference when you're doing this scenic stamping. You don't need to stress too much about where the light is coming. Just add a little bit of shadow and your eye will make it work. I don't like to get too technical over that because to me that takes some of the fun out of it. So I just add some. You can try and just do mostly like on this image where I'm doing most of the darker shadow to the right hand side of the cabin and also the trees. And I'm just picking that up from that acrylic block. You can also color with your markers directly onto your acrylic block and then pick that up to go ahead and paint with. And here I'm just putting a little bit of shadowing onto the trees as well. And like I said, that little bit of shadow, it really does make a difference whether it's on the ground or to the trunks of the trees. It doesn't take a lot, but just a touch of it with these winter scenes can make a big difference. A little bit of blue, gray. Those are kind of my go-to colors for shadows on winter images. You can go directly onto the paper if you really want to darken up a section like I did there. Took the marker directly to the paper and then blended that with water and my paintbrush. You could pull in just a watercolor palette and paint with that. Now these trees were stamped with a waterproof ink, so I don't have to worry about like losing the detail of those lines on the trunks. I can add water directly on top of that and they aren't going to blend like it did on those lines on the cabin. But I find it is just so relaxing to create these winter scenes. It's also a nice break. Say you've been making a lot of cards with a lot of die cutting, a lot of layers. These are just basically all one layer, so there's not a lot of like paperwork that you're doing, not paperwork, but cutting and measuring or anything like that. It's more coloring, shading that you can do. So switching up what you've been doing with something new or different can also keep you motivated and feel good and get you in there and actually using your supplies. So here's where I'm fixing that door. I wanted something with a touch of red just to give that sort of holiday Christmas vibe to this. So I just grabbed my Sakura Koi Field Sketchbox watercolors and I just painted that red and then added a little bit of the brown. That's the marker that I colored onto the acrylic block that I put over the top, but I felt like that tied it into the house as well. If you didn't want this to have as much of a sort of Christmassy vibe, you could do a green door. It doesn't have to pull in that red. Now here I thought I'm going to add a little bit of this grass stamping. So I've re-put on those masks to the tree and I'm stamping those with Toffee Crunch ink. Again, all the stamps using are listed down below, but man, with just like 5 or 6 stamps, you can have so many options for making your scenes, making them a little different, adding these little details like that grass right there. I just love what that little bit adds. I also feel like it balances out the browns of the cabin, and that's why I'm pulling in a little bit of that brown here onto the ground just to balance that out on the card. Now I'm picking up one of those Tombow dual brush markers and here's where I'm adding that light into the window and I will have the perfect sentiment for that too. I've stamped it onto my card. Let it snow and let your light glow, which I love with that cabin and the lights glowing in the window. Now here I just grabbed like a really tiny brush from my stash and I have some just cheap white acrylic paint. I think I picked mine up at Walmart and I squirted some onto a sticky note for a palette. That makes for super easy cleanup. And I'm adding a little bit here. Remember when I said, oh, if your branches aren't, mask isn't perfect on your branches, you can go back and just add some snow on top using some white acrylic paint. So that is what I'm doing here. I also love that it adds sort of that snowy look to the tree. So you can decide how thick you want that line. If you want there to be a lot of snow on those branches, make it a little bit thicker line on top of those. And as you are making a scenic card, also know that it doesn't have to be perfect because at the end, we're going to just put a whole bunch of splatters of snow on this. So let's say you have a part of your cabin where your blending just went south and you don't like it. Don't stop there. Just know that's where I'm going to put a nice big splat of snow later on. So you can always be saved by the snow splatters at the end for anything that didn't quite stamp or your blending or coloring didn't work out the way that you wanted it. So I have that acrylic paint and that's still on that sticky note. I have a toothbrush. I'm going to dip my toothbrush in water and then also dip into that acrylic paint and then I'm just going to splatter that all over the card. Now there's lots of ways to add splatters. This is not a way that I do very often. I did find as I made more cards, which you'll see at the end of this video, more scenic cards, the more water I added into that acrylic paint, the easier it was and the better that it splatted. So as I was doing it, if I got any really weird blobs, I'd kind of have that paintbrush handy to fix up. But I like the light spray that the toothbrush added. It's just kind of this all over really light snowy look. And then I can use that paintbrush to go in and have a little bit more, if you could say, like a controlled splatter, or I can put it where I want it. I can spread it out, have different sizes. So I think that adds depth and interest to the scene. Some really light splatter, some bigger snowflakes falling down. And again, you can see if there's a spot you don't like how you colored or blended, just make sure to put a snowflake there. And if you get it quick enough, you can kind of lift up some. So like there was a splatter I didn't like and I just lifted it up with the paintbrush. So I'll just go around here and add lots of snow. I'm also going to add just a little bit of smoke coming up from the chimney. So just kind of paint that on. That adds so much too, and it's super easy to do while you're adding your snow to the scene. And it's that simple. So I went ahead, I had my box of all my supplies there, and I made several cards using these exact same techniques. There's the one we did in the video today, and I'm just showing you all of these different cards that you could make using these scenic stamping techniques. Some with those cling stamps, the whole scene is done for you, so you can just use the same techniques, but you don't have to mix and match if you don't want to, but you certainly can. For me, that's part of the fun that keeps me having a great time. And now you can see that I've batched. I've got 6 scenic cards, and I will be ready then to put away what's in my box and move on with a new featured element choice for more cards. And I will be showing you that in the next video. So if you stay tuned here are pictures of all of the scenic cards I made, and I will be seeing you soon with a new video. Thanks for watching and happy stamping.